Playing out today on the 2020 primary stage, what might be the first real test of the new political rules established in the era of Donald Trump. Joe Biden showing shades of the unabashedness that rewrote the playbook during Trump's candidacy in 2016. Biden today refusing to back down in the face of controversy over his fond reflections on his relationships with segregationists in the Senate. And when his 2020 rival Cory Booker called on him to apologize, Biden lashed out.
Apologize for what?
Cory Booker's called for it.
Cory should apologize. He knows better. There's not a racist bone in my body. I've been involved in civil rights my whole career. Period. Period. Period.
In the political arenas of the past, a flashpoint like this might have seemed at least temporarily disastrous for a candidate under fire. But we're living in a new world where the man who was elected president of the United States makes unapologetic divisiveness part of his platform. To be clear, we are not comparing anything that Biden said or his record to anything that Donald Trump says or does. The race baiting, the fear mongering, the inflammatory invective that has come to define Donald Trump and his presidency. We're asking a question, though, that's now looming larger than ever over the Democratic field. Do voters in the era of Trump see a refusal to apologize as a sign of strength? And are the rules different for the Democratic frontrunner than they are for the man who was elected president in the last election? Here are 5 examples of Trump in moments of great political turmoil refusing to back down.
Well, I think it's always okay when somebody says something about you that's false. I think it's always okay to counterpunch or to fight back.
Hillary Clinton and her campaign of 2008 started the birther controversy. I finished it. I finished it.
Pocahontas, I apologize to you. I apologize. To you, I apologize. To the fake Pocahontas, I won't. You have people on both sides of that. They admitted their guilt. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
Some of the most offensive moments of his presidency. Again, I want to make clear, I'm not putting Joe Biden's comments and any of those from Donald Trump in the same category, simply asking a question. Has the practice of not apologizing become a new normal? Joining the conversation, Eddie Glaude, chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, plus joining us in Washington on the 2020 beat for us, Garrett Haake. Garrett, how's the campaign doing? I mean, is this a strategy from them? It looks like one.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard from a lot of the campaign's allies, particularly on Capitol Hill today, saying that the hullabaloo over this is just politics essentially at its worst, that what we're seeing is a bad faith effort by other campaigns to try to punch up at Joe Biden and make an issue out of something that all of these politicians, if they've been in the arena a while, instinctively understand. That is, that you have to do business with odious characters, with people that you don't necessarily even like or respect sometimes to get things done. But I think the danger here for Biden is this plays into a couple of the sort of traps for him, the idea that he's out of touch within the party. And I think the fact that these original comments came at a closed-door fundraiser, even though there was a pool reporter in the room, that is, after all, why we know that he said this in the first place, plays into this whole idea of an old Washington in which backroom deals were made. People are, sitting around drinking their mint juleps, talking about whatever they want to talk about after they did the day's business. That sort of vision of an older, smoke-filled room of Washington is exactly what a lot of folks in the Democratic Party want to reject. And so, it remains to be seen, I think, whether this sinks in with voters. I'm flying to South Carolina tonight and look forward to talking to folks down there about this tomorrow. But it's just one more day in which you're talking about some Biden foible of the 70s or 80s and not what he wants to do for the future of this country.
Eddie.
They will make a mistake if they read this as just simply politics only. I think it was a mistake. I think he should have just simply said it was a bad example, but the point still holds. That we have to sometimes work with people that we disagree with. But to invoke Eastland is something totally different. I'm from Mississippi. Elise is from Mississippi. Eastland is David Duke times 2 and 3 and 4. There are bodies at the bottom of the Mississippi River because of people like Eastland. You don't invoke him as an example of any kind of virtuous behavior, particularly in this moment. So that's the first thing. So it's just kind of tone deafness. The second thing is about the nature of the politics itself. We have to ask ourselves the difficult question: what is the ethical line that we draw with regards to, in terms of who we compromise with? Because in the history of this country, we have compromised with certain folk, and then a certain group of the country had to bear the burden of that compromise. So when we think about what FDR did in the context of the New Deal, how he had to compromise with Dixiecrats, how it led to the birth of the middle class, who was cut out? Who had to bear the burden of the compromise with the Dixiecrats? We could talk about civil rights legislation over the course of generations and how each time it was warded and all the bodies left behind because of the compromise. We have been on this racial hamster wheel since the country almost collapsed because of the Civil War, because of compromise with the likes of Jim Eastland. So Biden needs to understand that if he thinks he can play politics with this, he's going to have an interesting primary.
Do you predict that his numbers starts to see an impact? Is it cumulative? You think you make the first mistake and it makes all Democratic...
Well, for me, Nicole, it raises the question, the specter. Okay, what did you compromise about?
Does it disqualify him in your eyes?
No, not yet. But I mean, I'm asking, did you compromise with Strom Thurmond over the crime bill? Did you compromise with Byrd and Fritz Hollings and Jesse Helms over the war on drugs? What were the policy implications of your compromise? And who had to bear the burden of those compromises? I understand we got to get stuff done, but I think now we're going to be able to drill down. The issue here is not that he's a racist. That's too easy. The issue, what are the consequences of you bringing that example forward as an example of virtuous politics?
So I just think about this in terms of political analysis, right? I was listening to, I will do a plug now for a great new podcast that Mike Murphy and David Axelrod have that's called like Hacks on Tap, okay? The first episode was an episode that it was right in the wake of the controversy over the Hyde Amendment. And these two very smart guys said two things that I really noted of all the things in it. One was Mike Murphy saying, they're not letting Biden out to play very much. There's not much free-range Joe Biden right now. They're worried about him making mistakes. He goes to a fundraiser. It's a closed-door fundraiser. There's a pool reporter in there. He's he's supposed to talk for 20 minutes. He talks for 45. And in the middle of all of it, he says something like this that walks him into trouble. He could have easily come up with a way of making the same point. You got to work with repugnant people in order to get stuff done. But to cite those people in a party that's dominated by non-white vote and that where you got to have non-white vote, a lot of it, to win the Democratic nomination, just dangerous, bad, dumb politics, right? So they're keeping him out of he's not doing many campaign events. They're trying to keep him under wraps largely. And now twice on a rope line over the Hyde Amendment. And in this occasion, you've seen this illustrates the danger. So Mike's point was, if this becomes a pattern, Joe Biden's not going to be the nominee, because making these kind of mistakes over and over again, whether it happens this week or next week, these mistakes over and over again are going to lead to a decline as surely as night follows day. Axelrod's point was, the reason Joe Biden's the front runner right now is because he's the only Democratic candidate with a substantial share of the non-white vote. Everybody else is trying to figure out how do you get there with African Americans and Hispanic Americans. And right now, Joe Biden, because he's seen as someone who can beat Trump, and black voters care about that, and he was Barack Obama's vice president. Black voters care about that. That's a credentialing thing. He's got a ton, especially older African American support. As Axelrod said, if Joe Biden keeps that support, he's going to be the nominee. If he loses that support, he's not. And this topic opens the door to a conversation about, is it the joking about calling people boy versus calling people son, Cory Booker's point. It opens the door to a conversation about the crime bill. It opens the door to the conversation about Joe Biden's record on busing and a whole bunch of other stuff on policy that is going to be properly litigated right now. Joe Biden has a long record, and some of that record you could never adopt those positions on mass incarceration, on 3 strikes and you're out, on a whole bunch of stuff. For African American voters now, you could never have those positions in 2019. Right. And so we're now going to have that conversation, and he's opened the door to it. So this is a meaningful thing. He could still win. He could still be the Democratic nominee. But this week shows you, these last two things, shows you where the danger lies for Joe Biden in a pretty vivid way.
I want to ask you the question that we came in on, because I have reason to believe that he's been given some advice since apologizing for some other gaffes not to apologize, and that there's some analysis around him that what the Democrats are looking for in someone that can go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump is someone that stays connected to the voters in a way that seems scrappy. And this may be the worst example ever, and maybe it's my PTSD for 2016. I think that I said the Access Hollywood tape was disqualifying. I think that I said saying blood was coming out of Megyn Kelly's eyes was disqualifying. I mean, we didn't think you could, and he never apologized. Put the apology aside. I mean, are there things that voters will accommodate if they like someone enough, and is Biden that guy?
You know, I used to give advice to young political reporters who started covering politicians for the first time, and I said there are two questions you never ask. One, do you have any regrets about X? Because no politician has ever had any regrets about doing anything. And do you apologize for Y? Because no politician has ever apologized. It's a long history of it. It's not just reflecting Donald Trump. Maybe he feels that he has to be even more kind of righteous about this because he doesn't want to lose those white voters. So I don't think there's anything new about that. I do want to annotate one thing because Eddie has changed my thinking about a lot of this. But this idea that this reflects bipartisanship is a misnomer. Because Talmadge and Eastland were Democrats.
Right.
And remember, the Solid South, until the Civil Rights Bill, was Democrat. And then it became Republican. So what Biden could have done is said, you know what? This isn't about working across the aisle. This is about working within your own party where there are people who you can't really work with, but you need to do something because you're in your own party. That would have been a way to explain it a little bit better than just saying I'm not going to apologize.
But the bigger problem just is this, and this is, I think, I don't want to speak for Eddie Glaude, but I will say this. When you hear a white politician of a certain age say, back in the good old days, we were able to do this.
Exactly.
It's good old days for who, sir?
Yeah. Let me
and
bring
that is
Garrett.
what a lot of black voters are going to say.
Yeah.
Good old days for who?
Black, white, young, and female.
Yes, on just this issue, I'm focused on that. Yeah.
Garrett.
Yeah, I just think there's a tactical problem here, too, that the Biden campaign has to figure out. I mean, not apologizing worked for Donald Trump, in part because he's Donald Trump, but in part because he never turned the fire hydrant off. There was always another thing the next day, and he was able to constantly change the subject and control what he wants to talk about. The Biden campaign isn't running that way. I mean, we haven't seen Joe Biden in a public event since, I think, late last week. We won't see him until this weekend. So they have to decide if they're going to let Joe Biden be Joe Biden. That means, I think, that you're going to have to take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
But if you bubble wrap him and you don't have him out here, something like this then gets to fester for 2 or 3 or 4 days. And campaign aides out doing cable television hits are never going to be able to clean it up or address something as fulsomely as the candidate himself.
That is such a good point. It sort of highlights both of their strategic, and you call them tactical, vulnerabilities, that he's so limited in terms of our access to him that everything sticks. This is the second day we've been talking about it, and he's doing a Trump-like tactic without a Trump-like campaign. Garrett, will you come back tomorrow from South Carolina? You said you're heading down tonight.
We'll make it happen.
All right. Thank you for spending some time
See you
with
down there, Garrett.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.